Hello everybody, so today we're going to be going over how to create the Sandstorm effect for the environmental effects series. We'll be using Substance Designer to create some textures and reuse some of the old textures from the previous tutorials. We'll also be going over how to create the shader, blueprints, and particle effects. If you have any questions, comments, or any requests, please let us know below. Alright then, let's get started. So for this effect, I'm going to create my textures using Substance Designer. It's not going to be something really complicated or anything like that. It's just going to be simple nodes and a little bit of levels. So to get started, go to the new substance graph. Make sure that the size is 1024 by 1024 and press OK. So it's going to be really simple. I'm just going to blend between 3 to 4 textures and use a cloud texture. So I'm going to use the dirt noise for this one and dirt 2. So part of the reason I wanted to use these two is because I can blend between them and still maintain a bit of depth between the layers. So if you watched my tutorial for the motes effect, you saw that I created 4 layers of textures that I did an opacity on from 25, 50%, 75%, and 100%. This is exactly the same technique, but in a different software. So to do that, I'm going to take these 3 textures and I'm going to blend them using a blend node. And to show this menu, just press tab and you'll see the menu, and it's the second node, blend. And you'll have the foreground, which I want my the busiest to be in the foreground, and I want the background, which is going to be the less busy, and the opacity will be through the last texture, which is the cloud one. And when you look at this, you'll see that some of the dirt in here has a bit of different opacities, and that's exactly what I'm looking for when trying to do something like this. So it's as easy as that. And also the textures are tileable. And in Photoshop, the only unfortunate part is if I'm going to do this, I have to do it with a brush, with the 4 layers, and then have to do it through a offsetting, which you basically offset the frame and have to fill out the rest of it just so you don't have any seams. And for Substance Designer, this is just normal that it is tileable. Okay, so now that I have this blend in here, the next thing I'm going to do is a level node or levels, just so I can add a little bit to my opacity or take away from it a little bit. Okay. This is perfect. And for these, I'm actually going to increase the scale. So let's do 3. So the bigger the scale is, the more shapes you're going to get in there. And I understand that when doing something like this, it's a bit scary to try and increase the scale of it because you might not have the right resolution. But you can also change this in the engine. The reason I did it in here with the texture is because I want to get as much noise and as much resolution as I can. So when I change the size in here, it wouldn't lose its quality. Okay, so the next thing is for the dust going across the screen, for example, I'm just gonna use this cloud texture, to be honest. I'm not gonna change it. Well, I'm just gonna randomize it here. I think this looks fine. And if I have anything that I want to change or just edit, I'll just come back in here. But yeah, and to save these, just double click the note that you want to save. Save the icon here and just save it wherever you'd like. And yeah, so let's import these to Unreal. All right, now that we're in Unreal, let's import our textures. We got the cloud and sand. All right. As you can see, I've already set up a folder structure for this. This is just for my peace of mind and just a good practice in general. Okay, I'm gonna go to the material and create material and call this sand underscore camera underscore attached. Okay. Now that I'm in here, I'm gonna want to import my textures into the material editor. So there are two ways to actually do this. You can select your textures and just drag and drop them, or you can hold T and left click and you'll see that it already selected the texture that you wanted. That's because this is highlighted, but if it's not, and you hold T and click, you'll see it empty here, and you can just pick your textures from here. Okay, I'm gonna delete these two. So now that I have my textures here, I want to break this down a bit in a way that it's a bit understandable for me, right? So how I break down my effects is by their simplicity and complexity. So what I mean by that is, no matter how complex an effect is, it's good practice to break it down from its simplest form to its more complex form. So, for example, I have this texture, and what I want to do with it, that's how I start. So, for example, I wanted to animate from left to right or from right to left. So one thing that does that is the panner node. So if you hold P and click, you'll see that you have the panner node. Here you have coordinate, time, and speed. So what speed is used to basically animate from X and Y. So if you click here and then you do 1 in the X, you'll see that your texture is moving in the X axis. Or sorry, not X-axis, but in the X direction, which is U and V. So this is basically using the UV coordinates to move the texture. So if I preview the nodes, that's what you'll see. Let's say I wanted to add 1 to the Y, and it will basically go upward and to the left. So coordinates, it's basically used to tile the texture, or uses its coordinate to get it tiled. So if you hold U and left click, you'll see the text coordinate, which is texture coordinates. If you add it in here, you'll see that nothing really changed. But if you go into the texture coordinates and you increase the tiling with a U, you'll see that the texture is stretched now. So if I add it to the V, you'll see that the texture started to repeat in a bigger atlas. And that's what this is for. So this allows you to basically have it in a way where you can control that. So there is also another way of doing this, which is using a little bit of math. So if you hold hold M and left click, you'll see the multiply, right? So what you can do is multiply the coordinates by 2 constants and a append node. So to use a constant, there are 2 ways to actually create a constant. You hold 1 and left click and you'll see your node, or you hold S and left click and you'll see a parameter constant. So what this will do, if you use a constant parameter, as soon as you save and create a material instance, this parameter will show up in the material instance. So let's say, for example, I want to control the tiling for this texture, but in a parameter. So one way to do that is to use a append node. Append vector, this one. And I'm going to use this as X. And I'm going to use another one. So you can control C, control V. And you can do Y. Or you can call it U and V. It's up to you. I call it X and Y. So if I append this and then multiply it, so now it's at 1. So if I preview this, you'll see that it has exactly the same results. And if I add that into my texture, let me this back. Okay, perfect. You'll see that nothing really changed, but as soon as I start to change these values here, you'll see that it started to affect it. So let's say I save this and take it into a material instance. So I'm gonna save, and I'm just gonna add it into the emissive color and save it. If I go into here, create material instance. See, here you can just control the X and Y. So part of the reason why I'm showing you this is because we're going to create a really big material to control this shader. And it's just basically going over the basics of creating a material instance and a big shader. Okay, so now that I went over the coordinates, you can actually do the same thing for the speed. So you can copy these three nodes, and you can add it to the speed, and it will do the exact same thing. So if I put this to 0 and this to 0, it will stop. So now you have control over the tiling, and you have control over the speed. So if you add these two together, and let's say, for example, we call this speed X and speed Y, and we call this tiling X and tiling Y. Now, if you look at the texture and just add the basic parameters back in, or not the basic, sorry, the default parameter of these nodes, you'll see that you still have your texture and you still have your parameters. So if I save this, now you'll see that I have my X and Y speed. So if I add this here, just add any numbers that you would like, and you'll see that it's actually animating. And what I'm doing here is basically just reverting it to default. So I'm going to save this here, go back into the material, and yep. Okay, so this is basically what I want when it comes to the behavior. So now that I have that behavior, let's add another node. Let's add another texture that is the same. So, and why am I adding a different texture? So, having multiple textures on top of each other and moving at different speeds gives it a bit more fidelity and complexity. So, what I mean by that is, let's say I have this setup here, copy, and just change it here, because if you have the same names for these parameters, it will actually change them at the same time. So let's say if you see these two right now, if I change it to 2, it will automatically change it to 2 here. So, oh, did not change it. Weird. I think that's a bug. Oh, okay. But I don't want it to behave this way. So what I will do is actually add just something to the naming. So for this one, I'm going to call it text underscore 2 underscore tiling x. So what that will do, this is basically going to call this texture 2, and you're not going to basically have an issue with it when you change the numbers. So I'm just going to copy this right here, just add it to everything else. Oops. Okay, so now that we've added everything here, let's say I want these two to go in the x direction. So for speed, we go x, and for speed, we go x. And what I'm going to do is actually add them together. So to do an add node is hold A and left click, and it'll give you an add node. And I'm going to right click and start previewing. So now you can see nothing really changed here. So if I go back in here and change the speed to 0.2, you'll see that there is a little bit of movement differentiation where you have one is going fast and one is going slower. So let's say I change this into translucent and add this way. So now you can see it a bit better. So for me, right, when I'm doing something like this, I just think about it in a way, how would I trick the player? How can I get rid of the add the complexity and get rid of the uniformity? This is one way of doing it. So adding that the speed differentiation is, or the speed difference, gives it a bit more complexity. And add on top of that, changing the actual tiling, you will get something like this. So if I change the tiling x to 0.5, or I think part of the reason, because I changed it to 0.5, it matched the speed just a tad bit because it stretched it just a bit. So if I show you, this is what it would look like. But that's completely fine. I'm just gonna add a multiplier into here just so I can change the value of it just a bit. Let's see, start previewing, and the same thing here. I'm not gonna keep this for now. I'm just trying to show you why I'm doing this way. So let's say we add 0.5 to this. You know what, 0.1. Okay, so now you see like there's difference in speed, difference in tiling, and this will basically break the illusion of having the players look at something and say, oh, okay, this is repeating, or this is looks a bit weird, and so on. So that's basically just adding to the complexity of your shader or your effect. Okay, so let's see. Let's add this, the tiling. Let add more to the speed just to showcase this. Okay, but you get the point. I hope. I hope I explained it right. Okay, so to go back to this, let me remove these here. Okay, so this is why I made these parameters, because I want to have more control over my shader. So yeah. Also, one thing to keep in mind, you can actually use multiple, you can use one text coordinate for multiple textures and so on. But let's keep it this way, just to be a bit organized. Okay, so now that we have these, let's just reset them to their original sizes. And 0. And 0 for the speed for you. Okay. All right. So now that I have this, one other thing I want to add even more complexity to this is add a UV distortion. So to do that, I'm actually not going to change the texture at all. I'm just going to leave this here, make another texture, which is the same, and use the same setup here, copy it, paste it in the back, and for this one, I'm just going to use it to, so for this one, I'm just going to use it to distort the main texture, which is this one. So to do that, I'm just going to call this DIS for distortion. And go to the tiling, speed. See, as much as I like to just add things together and call it a day, the problem with that comes where you don't get, at some point, it looks a bit boring. So to add even more complexity and more shape into it, you add a distortion or you add something else to the mix to keep it interesting. And that's basically what I'm doing here. So let's see. I'm going to remove this. Do a multiply. And just do a constant parameter. And again, to do this is hold S and left click. And also, if you have this one, which is when you hold one and left click, you can just convert it into a parameter this way too. And I'm gonna call this distortion. Okay. And now I'm just going to add it to the texture. Right, I need to use the green channel for this. Okay, so now if I preview my texture here, you see there's like nothing that happens, but if I do the distortion here, add just one to it, you'll see that I have a bit of distortion to it. So let's say I want the distortion to be bit bigger. So I just go back to the tiling and just change it from here. And now let's say I want speed to the distortion or movement. I go to the speed and add it to it. But let's not do it in here, and I'm just going to do it inside here in a second. Okay, let's actually, before I move on, there is one thing I'm gonna do to basically do a bit of housekeeping. So I'm gonna copy this here and go into groups. If you highlight all these nodes and go into groups and just type in whatever you want here, it will actually group up your parameters just for housekeeping, so you wouldn't have like a big list of things to worry about. So it put it in distortion. I probably misspelled that. But yeah. So if I go into here, back, distortion, and for example, for these, I'm gonna call this texture 1. And for this one, you can actually, I don't think you can group it, but I will convert it into a parameter called distortion, or just paste whatever I posted here. And if I save this and go to the material instance, you'll see that the texture for the distortion is here, and I can actually change it to whatever texture that I want. And I don't have to be confined to that same texture. Okay, so now that I have these grouped, I'm gonna call this texture 2. Okay, so that's grouped. All right. Okay, so at this point, there is one other thing I would suggest doing, just for the sake of your mental health when it comes to looking at materials and spaghettis. Highlight all of the ones that you're want to group and Control C, or just C, actually, sorry. And here you can just section them off and call them, like for example, this is distortion. And let's say this one is a panner, or you can do texture 1 panner, like this, for example. And you can do texture 2 panner. And this would just save you time if you're, let's say for example, and this, I was guilty of this for a long time. When I do my materials, I don't comment on them. And later on, I have to go back like, oh, okay, what did I do here? Like, why does this look so foreign to me? So, yeah. Okay, so now that I have these here, my next step is to actually create a mask to have it. So the mask will basically be a top to bottom mask. So it will hide your texture or shader from when the player looks at a certain direction, it doesn't see a cutoff point. So let's see. Apologies, I actually hit the stop record button while I was talking, like how almost for like 20 minutes. So to go back into this, first thing I wanted to create here was a mask to hide the cutoff point, which was a, if you hold U and left click, you'll see a text coordinate. If you add a text coordinate with a component mask, so for example, if you do Shift C, you'll see a mask. If you actually preview that, you'll see that it has the coordinates of the text coordinates. So what this will do, you can separate your red and green channel. So what you'll have is something like this. So you'll have a gradient from white to dark. So to actually, what I want this to be is the dark to be at the top and bottom. So one trick to do that is to do a 1 minus, which will flip this actual mask into something like this. And if we multiply this by holding M and left click, you will get this result. So that way, if you multiply this result with your original texture or shader, you will get something like this. So now, if I add this to the opacity, you will get something like this. So you won't have this hard cutoff point anymore. Okay, to add a bit of more to this, because I do want to control how much I can affect this. So if you do a multiply with a scalar and call this mask, and let's add it into here. Okay, I'm gonna give it a value of 5 for now. And of course I can control this one however I want later on. So next it will be a clamp. Just to clamp the values for this. And after that, let's see. Let's do a depth fade. So what the depth fade does is actually when you have a, let's say for example you have a material or a object is intersecting with the world or something else, it gives it that fadeness. So you wouldn't have a hard cutoff. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. And that's here and call it depth. Oh, a scalar and call that a depth fade. Okay, make this at like 500 for now. And I think this should be good to go. Oh, actually there is one more thing I need to do. Well, a couple of other things. First, let's add a comment to here and call this mask. And have that here. Next, I am going to do the texture sample by holding T and left click. And I'm going to grab the sand texture again. Okay. Next, I'm literally just going to copy these here again because I want this to be a bit more, I still want more control over this. So let's see how this would look like. So I'm just going to call this sand instead. Sand tiling. And sand speed. Okay. So if I add this texture to this result, oh, actually, if you hold Control and move the output result into this one and then add them together, you'll see that I've also added my dust in there, or my sand. Okay, so there's two more things I want to add in here. One, it would be a control over these individual textures. So the same way I did here with the distortion, I would do with this. So let's say, for example, I want the foreground to be more, has more density or more opacity than the background. This is how I would control it. So if you do a multiply with a scalar, and you call this texture, do texture 1 underscore opacity, and you basically can copy this again. I'm gonna do texture 2. And for this one, I'm just gonna call it sand opacity. And I'm gonna add the value of 1. So part of the reason I'm doing this is because, let's say, for example, if you're doing this in a dynamic weather type situation and you want to increase a value of one of your materials or one of your textures, like for example, if I wanted to increase the sand, I can increase it this way while keeping the other values the same. And I can also change the tiling and so on. So I'm going to put this back into 1 and just add a comment to this, sand underscore hammer. Okay. So now The only thing that's left for the shader itself when it comes to the look is the color, which it will be a multiply with a vector 4 or a dynamic vector. I say dynamic vector, it's more of a parameter vector. So if you hold 4 and left click, you'll see this color vector, and you can pick whatever color you would like from here. But what I'm going to do is convert it to a parameter and call this sand underscore or storm, or sand underscore storm underscore color. Okay, and I'm just going to attach it to here. Again, I have this type of color picked for these, so I'm just going to use this one. So these are the numbers for it if you want to copy them. Okay, and the last thing that is left is... Oh, right. So one more thing left, which is the world position offset. What I would like to add in there is a way for this to be added to the camera. So let's say, for example, I save this and let's take it into the world. And let's say I have a sphere here. So let's see. Sector. So let's say I have this sphere here. And I want to attach this material too, so I can control it when it's in the world, right? Let's see. I'm just going to drag and drop. And that's the sphere that I have for this material. So the next thing I want to do is actually attach this sphere to the camera to show that it's like in front of the player and it's basically in the world. So to do that, it's a simple 3-node, which you have camera position and object position, and you just subtract them. You need to subtract the camera position from the object position to do this. And the result will look something like this. I maybe have flipped it. No. Okay. Maybe that's weird. Let me play it from there. Okay. Let's see. What are we missing here? Oh, probably because it's not a two-sided material. Yep. Such simple things we forget. Alright, so that's the effect that you'll get when you're like in the world. And also to fix this issue that you see, go to the left side of your material detail and scroll all the way down until you find max world position offset displacement, and just put it at a really, really high number. And when you look at this, it needs to be higher. I didn't save, that's why. Now as you can see, this is the result that you're gonna get with the shader. So, part of the reason we're using the material instance, because you can actually just do your changes on the fly, and you wouldn't really need to go into the material again unless you're trying to change something. So we're having the material go sideways. So it's going to be in the x-axis, or in the y-axis actually. So I'm going to kill the distortion first, not have any in there. Let's try and start. Actually, let me just make this into a better. Okay. So just gonna go back in here for a second and make sure that I change these into a parameter for the shaders. Call this sand. Switch this and call it text2. And this one, texture1. Okay. So now let's do this and just activate all of these parameters. I know it's going to be a lot of work just, you know, going through every single one of them, but don't forget that you already grouped them up into groups. I didn't do that for this. So that way you wouldn't really fall into that trap of having too many things to worry about. Let's see. So these are the opacity. Okay, so for the opacities, let's leave them same way. Let's try zeroing out this. Okay. So let's start with the tiling first. So let's go with the y-axis and do the sand. This is gonna be, let's try 10 and something like this seems nice for now. Okay, I'm gonna do 0.8 and then 10 for the X. For texture 1, let's zero that. Okay, so let's set this to 0.5. Oh, I see what's going on with this. It's because of the distortion, and I need to kill it. So let's do 0 for now. Okay. Or maybe just 0.1. All right, scrolling down. Okay, perfect. So let's say 0.5 should be fine for this, and 3 for this one. And then for the second one, tiling, gonna do 0.8 and maybe not. Let's try 0.4 and 8, maybe 5 for this. You really wouldn't tell until you start adding the speed in there how things would look like. So I'm gonna start by 0.5 on the y-axis for everything, just to see how it would look like. So if I play from here, I would have this type of effect. And if you run or go anywhere, should be good to go. Okay. So let's see how it would look like in the world if we start changing the speeds. Go with 0.2 for this one. And let's try 6. This. And for texture 2, I'm just going to add a tad bit in the X. So it has that difference in it. And just take a little bit just to see what it would look like. All right. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to increase some stuff here a little bit. I'm going to decrease the opacity for, no, increase the opacity for the sand texture. And decrease the tiling for it. So let's see, 0.5. And so I can see what it would look like. Okay, that's nice. All right, from this point on, it's basically just trial and error on how things would look like. Let's see. I think for now I'll leave it this way, and when I start adding everything else, I will get to a point where I start changing a lot of stuff in here, and basically just get to a point where adding everything together, like the particles, the fog, and all of that stuff in the level, will give me a better result than just doing all the changes right now. Okay, so now that we have this, I'm just going to delete it for now and bring it back later.